The palace lights blinked once, then twice, then failed entirely, leaving Theo Marin face first in a bowl of something gelatinous, purple, and apparently sacred. There were shouts, metal clattered. Somewhere to his left, a noble shrieked like a stuck plasma goose. "Oh, stars," Silari muttered under her breath, helping him upright with all the grace of a queen whose fiancé had just insulted an entire dynasty with his forehead. "You've just desecrated the oracle jelly of Thorandel." "I was aiming for the fruit," Theo said, spitting purple goo onto a velvet napkin. "Didn't realize dinner was booby-trapped." Above them, the chandeliers flickered back to life with a high-frequency buzz, and the assembled noble council slowly resumed chewing, though many did so while glaring at the human like he'd just performed dental surgery on the goddess herself. Selari offered a diplomatic smile and snapped her fingers for a servant. Theo tried not to wipe his face on the tablecloth again. The truth was, he'd never meant to end up here. One minute he'd been a field medic patching up bullet wounds and toxic burns in some cratered backwater. The next he was attending his own engagement feast in a city that floated over a gas giant and expected him to memorize 9,000 years of etiquette by dessert. He squinted toward the dais where High Marshal Venzer sat, unmoving, carved from the same granite as his disapproval. The man hadn't spoken directly to Theo since he arrived on Virelia, unless you counted the time he described humans as biological accidents with excellent timing. At least Silari found it all entertaining. She leaned toward him now, voice low. "They're debating whether to exile you or educate you." "I vote for exile. Is it warm?" "Only in the volcanic zones. You'd melt before morning." He grinned despite himself. There was something disarming about her, even when she was covered in royal regalia and surrounded by politicians who wanted his head. Maybe it was the way she still stole pastries from the royal kitchens, or how she snorted when she laughed too hard. Or maybe it was the long ears which twitched when she was amused and went utterly still when she was trying not to murder someone. They were still now. "Theo," she whispered, "look left. Slowly. Don't make eye contact with the green-robed one." He did. The green-robed one, unfortunately, noticed. "Oh, good," Theo said. "He's coming over." "That's the ambassador of lineage integrity." "That sounds made up." "It's very real, and he hates your DNA." The ambassador arrived with a flourish of layered silks and a look that suggested Theo had tracked in mud from a lesser dimension. "Human," he said with the tone of someone announcing a contagious rash. "You are aware, I hope, that the concord of bloodlines forbids interspecies union." Theo blinked. "Do you mean marriage, or—" "The fun part." Silari let out a strangled cough. Several dignitaries gasped. The ambassador's ears twitched in horror. "You mock 1,000 years of sacred law?" "Only the parts that don't make sense. So most of it." The ambassador made a noise like a broken synthesizer and turned away, muttering curses in Old Elendari. Selari didn't stop laughing until her drink nearly came out of her nose. They escaped after dinner by faking a diplomatic migraine. In the corridor outside the feast hall, the echo of their laughter faded under the weight of approaching silence. The air was cooler here, laced with the hum of distant reactors and the scent of ionized crystal. Theo touched the wall, half expecting it to scold him. "You're pushing them too far," Silari said after a moment. "Even your jokes are dangerous." "I'm just trying to survive, preferably without being assassinated by table etiquette." She looked up at him, something tender flickering behind her golden eyes. "You don't have to keep deflecting with humor." "Have you met me?" "I've done considerably more than meet you." He blushed. "Okay, fair." They walked on, past arched windows, looking out into the cloudscape of Irelos 6. The gas giant swirled below them in silent fury, its storms a reminder of just how small everything really was. Somewhere beneath that beauty lay the ruins of a forgotten civilization, something the Elendari never discussed, even though Theo knew Sailari had gone down there once, in secret. She still bore the scars. "I wasn't supposed to live," she said suddenly. He stopped walking. "Back then," she continued, voice soft, "on Drelhan, when I collapsed, they told me I'd be dead in an hour. The infection was woven into my nervous system. And yet, here you are." Because of you. He shrugged. I had gloves and a good guess. No, you had something we don't. She touched his chest lightly. You had compassion unburdened by hierarchy. You broke protocol. You used blacklisted biotech. You rewrote your own programming. I panicked and used duct tape on your spine. She smiled. Exactly. They were silent again, but this time it was full, not empty, a warm kind of quiet. Behind them, the corridor lights flickered. Salari's ears twitched. That's the third flicker today, she said. Do you think it's a wiring issue? Or a cosmic omen? She tapped her wristband. The display shimmered. Neither. I think it's a pulse disturbance. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of disturbance? She hesitated. One we haven't seen in 400 years. They turned back the way they came, her expression suddenly distant. As they passed a crystalline arch etched with old high speech, Theo felt a strange sensation behind his eyes. A flicker, like déjà vu on fire. He stumbled. Salari caught his arm. You felt it too? He nodded, disoriented. It felt like someone else's memory, not mine. She exhaled slowly. Then the bloodline has already started to awaken. Define awaken. The ancient kind. Pre-Civil War. The legacy memory chains were supposed to be sealed. If they're bleeding through, then we're both in deep galactic bantha poodoo? Yes, she said, though we don't say it that way. Well, we should start. They made it to the atrium just as the first tremor hit. Not an earthquake. There were no tectonics here, but a pressure change, like a shift in the atmosphere's soul. The plants recoiled. The lights turned gold, then violet, then died. Somewhere deep beneath the palace, something old stirred. Theo glanced at Silari. So, when do I get my laser sword? She smiled grimly. You get a ceremonial dagger, embroidered robes, and an appointment with the royal historian. I hate everything about that sentence. Welcome to royalty. The ceremonial dagger was smaller than Theo expected. More letter opener than weapon, with a hilt wrapped in vines that moved just enough to make him nervous. It's breathing, he said. Why is it breathing? It's bonded to your neural temperature signature, the royal historian replied without looking up from her ledger. Standard protocol. If it stops breathing, it means you're either dead or boring. Theo held the dagger at arm's length. What happens if I stab myself with it? You'll briefly communicate with your own subconscious in the form of an eight-eyed owl, then you'll pass out. Okay, noted. He slid the dagger into a side pouch and winced as the vines tightened slightly, like they were hugging him out of spite. The royal historian, a woman whose eyes glowed faintly and whose hair changed color depending on how disappointed she was, waved him toward the door. Salari was waiting outside, arms crossed, eyebrows arched. How'd it go? I've been psychically adopted by a knife. How do you think it went? She fell into step beside him, their boots clicking softly on the polished synth marble. They walked in silence for a moment as the corridors stretched and curved in impossible geometries, their very architecture subtly shifting based on lineage permissions. Theo's presence often triggered defensive loops or rewrotes, but today the palace merely grumbled. So, he said, any news on our friend the pulse disturbance? Salari nodded, her expression carefully neutral. It's not isolated. There have been 6 similar flickers across the capital, all near deep inheritance nodes. English, please. Places built atop memory clusters. You know how our bloodline stores ancestral memory? It's not just metaphorical. He frowned. You're saying there's an actual hard drive under the floor? More like a neural lattice grown from stone and quantum dust. I'm going to pretend I understand that. She stopped at a door sealed with a triple helix glyph. We're going in. Theo read the sign. The Chamber of Threads. Sounds cozy. It's not. Don't touch anything unless it touches you first. Reassuring. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit by strands of something like spider silk stretched across crystalline pillars. When they moved, the threads hummed, a harmony of voices layered with centuries of thought. Theo followed her down the center path, heart thudding. At the center stood a basin, smooth and black, filled with liquid memory. Salari touched the surface. Her eyes flickered silver. It wants to show you something. Theo stepped forward, not sure if he was honored or about to be possessed by a choir of alien ancestors. He leaned in. Images flooded his mind. A woman with Silari's eyes but cloaked in archaic garb stood on a battlefield of stars. Around her swirled figures of light and fire, arguing, fighting, then kneeling. The vision shifted, temples burning, statues cracking, a great schism between those who embraced change and those who clung to blood purity. At the center of it all, a decision, a forbidden bond. He staggered back. "That was you." She looked at him. "That was Queen Elisa, my ancestor, the last ruler to bond with an outsider." Theo wiped sweat from his brow. "So this has happened before?" "Yes, and it nearly tore our people apart. But what followed was peace, until her successors erased her legacy." He paced, the weight of history pressing down. "So we're repeating her mistake?" "No," Salari said. "We're reviving her hope." They left the chamber with the air around them still shimmering. Outside, the palace had grown restless. Hallways twisted more than they should. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning for breaches. Back in Theo's assigned quarters, which resembled a minimalist art gallery with trust issues, he collapsed onto the sleep field and stared at the ceiling. "So, destiny, huh?" The wall chirped. "Incoming message from High Marshal Venzer." Theo groaned. "Decline. Wait. No. Accept. But only in audio." Venzer's voice filled the room like a thundercloud with a law degree. "Human, your presence continues to destabilize our people." Theo sat up. "Great to hear from you, too. You mock us with your sarcasm. The Concord's core tenets are unraveling, and now memory nodes are activating across the city. You think that's my fault? I think your bonding to the princess is unlocking elements best left buried." Theo rubbed his temples. "I didn't come here to start a revolution. I just didn't want her to die alone on a plague moon." There was silence on the line. When Venzer finally spoke, it was quieter. "And yet, here we are." The message ended. Celari entered moments later, dropping a bag of contraband earth snacks onto the table. "I bribed the archivist, got you real peanut butter cups." Theo perked up. "You are now officially my favorite alien." "Don't tell my uncle." They shared a quiet laugh, and then she sobered. "We need to leave the palace." He blinked. "I just unpacked my second toothbrush. There's a monastery under the polar cliffs, older than the capital. It's where Queen Elissa fled during the succession wars. If the bloodline is awakening, it might be drawing us there. Let me guess, no security, no transport, and lots of people who want us dead along the way?" She smiled. "It's your favorite kind of vacation." He sighed. "Fine, but I'm bringing the knife." "Good, you're going to need it." They departed under cover of night, aided by a cloaking cloak that Theo was certain was just a glorified shower curtain until it actually worked. Their route took them through ancient causeways, beneath glowing fungi and forgotten murals. Once they had to bribe a tunnel sprite with holographic cheese. "Remind me again why we can't just teleport?" "Because teleportation destabilizes latent memory fields. You might arrive with a third arm or someone else's regrets." "Charming." By morning, they reached the edge of the polar shelf. The air here was thin and sharp. A temple rose from the ice like a wound. Theo squinted. "That's a monastery? Looks more like a haunted toaster." Salari took his hand. "Welcome to the House of Echoes." They entered. The door didn't open. It inhaled. Inside, everything felt wrong. The walls pulsed. The floor shifted under their steps. And then, from the far end, a voice. Not one voice, but thousands woven into one. "She has returned. The bond awakens. The outsider has been accepted." Theo looked at Salari. "Is that good?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were glowing. The air in the House of Echoes vibrated with an unholy hum, as if the walls themselves were unsure of who or what was allowed to exist inside them. Theo had no intention of being the next sacrificial lamb to whatever cosmic nonsense the monastery had going on, but he was beginning to feel like a bit of a participant in a galactic comedy show. Only problem was, the stakes weren't funny. Not anymore. Celari?" he whispered, trying to steady his breathing. "Are we dying? Is this a metaphor for our relationship?" She didn't answer immediately. Her face was fixed, almost expressionless, as though she were hearing something beyond his comprehension. Her eyes, that bright silvery glow, had deepened into a burning intensity. Her grip on his hand tightened, and for the first time in ages, Theo wasn't sure if it was because she was holding on to him for comfort or if she was afraid he might bolt. Then the voice came again, but now it was clearer, louder, more direct. The bond must be completed. The legacy calls. The one who is not of this world is the key. Theo felt the hairs on his neck stand up. The voice reverberated through his entire body as though the words were coming from inside his mind, digging into his very soul. What's happening? He managed to say, but his voice felt small. The chamber seemed to stretch around them, as if the walls themselves were pulling away, revealing vast nothingness beyond. The ancestors are waking up, Salari said, her voice oddly calm. This temple was built for those moments when the bloodline, or what's left of it, calls out, and the bond is meant to settle the rift. The rift? Theo asked, his mind still catching up. What rift? The rift between the ancient rulers and their people. It's been passed down through generations of royal blood, but it's always been... She paused, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. A lie. The royal bloodline has been fractured for centuries. It's been hidden, rewritten, erased, but not completely. Theo's heart raced. He thought of the history lessons he'd barely managed to stay awake through. So, you're telling me that everything the Elendari thought was history? It was a cover-up. A cover-up designed to keep them in power, to preserve an illusion of purity, but it was never pure. She closed her eyes for a moment. That's why the bond is forbidden. It's never been about our bloodline staying strong. It's been about preventing change, about ensuring no outsider ever got close enough to reveal the truth. Theo stared at her, suddenly feeling like the strangest outsider of all. And you were always going to find out the truth, weren't you? Yes, she said, her voice a whisper, but it was filled with an unsettling certainty. I didn't choose to be this way, Theo. I chose you. But it's more than that now. I'm choosing something else. Something the old rulers could never allow. Something that would break the chains they've kept around us. Theo was quiet for a long moment, taking in everything she had just said. The weight of the decision ahead settled heavily on his chest. But strangely, the more he thought about it, the more it felt right. He didn't know how to explain it. But it was like the future was calling to him, pulling him forward, and somehow, this was part of it. The voices were louder now, rising to a crescendo. She has chosen the outsider. She has bound the bloodline with foreign hands. The legacy has awoken. The last part of the sentence vibrated through his teeth, and his vision blurred for a moment as the room seemed to warp. He stumbled, but Sailari held him steady. She was still glowing, her form pulsing with the intensity of the ancient energy in the room. It's starting, she whispered. We have to make the choice, Theo. Together, he said without hesitation. She nodded and, in one fluid motion, pulled him to the center of the chamber, where the basin of memory liquid began to bubble and pulse like a heartbeat. Her voice broke the silence again, echoing throughout the space. I choose to bind myself to this new legacy, one built on truth, one that accepts both our past and our future. Theo's chest tightened as the floor beneath them shuddered. He placed a hand on the basin. The liquid inside began to swirl, a light coming from deep within it that cast shadows all around them. There was no going back now. The truth had been revealed, and it had to be embraced. He closed his eyes and whispered, I choose you. I choose the future. With that, the energy in the room flared, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if time itself stopped. The walls of the temple seemed to fall away, leaving them floating in a vast, infinite space. Figures glowing with ancient power appeared around them. Thousands of ancestors, their forms flickering like projections. They spoke in unison, but the words were clear. The bond is complete. The legacy has been reawakened. The future has been chosen. A flash of brilliant light engulfed them, and suddenly everything shifted. Theo found himself standing on the steps of the palace. The familiar hum of the city filled the air, but there was something different now. The air felt charged, alive with possibility. Sailari stood beside him, her silvery eyes still glowing, but now with a calm certainty that hadn't been there before. The palace seemed less like a prison and more like a symbol of something new, a place of change, not control. "We did it," she said quietly, her voice filled with something soft, almost tender. "We changed everything." He smiled, feeling the weight of the journey lift off his shoulders. "I guess that's one way to start a revolution." Sailari laughed softly, and he felt the tension between them finally dissolve. The moment hung in the air, a quiet victory. They had made it. Together they had broken the cycle, confronted the truth, and reshaped the future of a kingdom. They had done what they thought was impossible, and in doing so, they had freed themselves and the Elendari from the shackles of the past. And in that silence, with the weight of centuries upon their shoulders, Theo realized something profound. It wasn't the royal blood that had carried them forward. It was their bond, their connection, the choice they had made together. The kingdom's legacy had been thrown into peril, yes, but now it was also free to grow. And so they walked forward, together, into the future.